Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Too Much on Her Plate podcast with me, Dr. Melissa McCreary. This is the place to be if you are ready to ditch the diets and find your own true way to creating freedom from overeating and emotional eating without more overwhelm and without more stress. Whether you are new to the podcast or a longtime listener, I made something for you. For a while now, I have been getting questions and comments from listeners saying, I love the podcast and I would really like a guide to how to digest past episodes. Where do I start? What would be most helpful? And so I've created a roadmap for you. The Freedom from Overeating Roadmap for Smart Busy Women is a guide to must-listen podcast episodes. It's your roadmap for how to get started or podcast episodes that you might want to revisit because they are super helpful for understanding the approach that I take in the podcast. And in addition to this free user guide, I have also included resources for beginning to address the reasons that you overeat. That eternal question that your brain wants to ask, okay, this is all very interesting, but what do I do? If you haven't downloaded it yet, go to toomuchonherplate.com/map, M-A-P, and grab your own copy of the Freedom from Overeating Roadmap and Podcast Guide. Hit pause, do that first, and then let's dive into this week's episode. Hey everybody, it's time for another listener Q&A episode where I answer a question that was submitted by one of our listeners. And if you have a question that you would like me to answer on an upcoming episode, what you need to do is join my private Facebook community. Go to facebook.com/groups/too much on her plate, all one word, and drop your question there. That's where I collect questions for these episodes, and I would love to hear what is on your mind. I will put that link in the show notes. So today, the question is, how do I stop flaking out on myself? This is from Laura, and she says, how do I stop flaking out on myself? In the rest of my life, I'm learning how to do this. I'm learning not to make commitments that I know I can't keep or that I won't show up for, but I can't seem to hold myself to the same standard when it comes to my goals and my plans for changing my eating. A related question was from Beth, who says, how do I get myself to follow through? I could write a book on what I need to do. I know all the things I should do to rein in my eating. I know more than I ever wanted to, but it seems like almost every week I write the plan, I decide how I'm going to eat and all the things that I'm not going to do and the things that I'm going to do. And then by Tuesday or Wednesday, it's all evaporated and I'm back to the same old patterns. I am betting, if you are a listener of this podcast, that you might be familiar with similar patterns and cycles to what Laura and Beth are describing. So many smart women are caught up in cycles of trying all the things, getting off track and starting over, and then doing it over again. And you've probably also experienced how over time, this over and over again pattern erodes your confidence and your hope, and you're feeling like you're ever going to get anywhere. So I want to tackle Laura's question, how do I stop flaking out on myself? The overview or the big picture answer is simple, and it's also not simple. You need to stop making promises or commitments to yourself that you can't or that you won't keep. It's important to realize that diet culture has taught you to do just that, to make promises or commitments all the time that are either unkeepable or that you don't want to keep. Weight loss advice is stacked with all or nothing thinking and all or nothing expectations. You either succeed or you fail. It was a good day. It was a bad day. Some plans, like Whole30, literally tell you that if you make one misstep, then you have to start completely over again. It's ruined, right? Everything you did takes you back to zero. So you've learned to think about the plans that you make in the context of all or nothing. You've learned to make promises that are big and that probably make you tired just thinking about them. And a history of making these kind of plans that aren't realistic or that aren't sustainable, that leads to less self-trust, because you also then have a history of breaking the plans. Half the time, you know you aren't going to be following through on the things that your brain is telling you that you should do. It just seems like the thing you have to do. It's the thing you're supposed to do. It's the thing you, air quotes, need to do. So you keep making the plans. You keep not following through on the plans. You keep recreating the cycle. You're going to stop flaking out on yourself. And I'm just going to use Laura's term for this because I think a lot of people can relate to the term because it's how we tend to talk to ourselves in our brain about this. You will stop flaking out on yourself when you start to rebuild trust in yourself. And you will start to rebuild trust when you start building a trail of promises that you do keep. So how do you do this? And specifically, how do you do this when it comes to making changes with eating and overeating and emotional eating? The first thing is that in order to stop flaking out on yourself, you need to practice making smaller commitments, and then keeping them. This sounds like such a simple thing, but practicing making smaller commitments and following through on them means ignoring your brain, which is going to tell you that only big dramatic actions count. Only big dramatic actions are worth anything. Big dramatic actions that are unkeepable, that's why you don't trust yourself to follow through when you try to stop overeating or emotional eating. And freedom from overeating requires self-trust. I'm going to keep repeating how these pieces go together because it's important. And it is going to be important to have a foundation in knowing this stuff because you're going to have to talk back to your brain. Your brain wants you to do big. Your brain wants you to do dramatic. Your brain wants you to do all or nothing. You rebuild self-trust by practicing making smaller commitments and keeping them. Recently, I did another podcast episode with Wendy, who is a past member of my You're Missing Piece program. And on that episode, she talks about self-trust in a really beautiful way. And she talks about how her discovery about her lack of self-trust and the process of rebuilding her own self-trust, she talks about how that changed her eating. I'm going to put a link to that episode in the show notes. It is episode number 141, and you might want to scroll for that on your podcast app and listen to it because I think it really overlaps with what I'm talking about here with this whole idea of making promises to yourself that you can keep and rebuilding self-trust and not feeling like you flake out on yourself. So making commitments of a size that you can commit to and be consistent with is really important. And it is not only making smaller commitments or taking smaller steps. It's also about the kind of commitments or promises that you're making to yourself. The commitments that you choose to make are really important. So often, actually, I think most of the time, particularly in this area around eating and weight and overeating and emotional eating, we are so programmed around how to do it. Deprivation culture is so entrenched, and diet mentality and all the things we've learned about what the rules are supposed to be and what we should do and what is necessary to create change. All of that stuff is so almost cellular, like it's embedded in us that it is really easy to be reactive. Our brain says, oh, I want to lose weight, or, oh, I need to stop eating in the evening. And then it's, I need to do this and I should do this. And this is what you have to do, which are all reactive ways of thinking. It is not just about making smaller commitments. It is about the kind of commitments you choose to make. You don't want to simply reactively decide what you should do or what you have to do. Before you make a promise or a commitment to yourself, which is what you do when you wake up on Monday and say, okay, this is my plan for the week. This is the thing I'm going to hold myself accountable for. Before you do that, ask yourself some questions. Make sure you're being intentional and not simply reacting to all the old stuff and all the old patterns and all the old ways of thinking and believing. Ask yourself, do you really want to do this thing that you woke up and said, all right, this is going to be my plan for the week? Do you really want to do it? Can you really see yourself following through? And I'm not saying that in a skeptical way because I don't believe in you, but is this really something you can see yourself being consistent with, that you really believe you could keep this promise to yourself about? Or is it too big? Or does it not fit you? Is it somebody else's should that is never going to work for you? Don't just reactively make a promise to yourself. Be clear on why you're making this promise to yourself. That may sound like it's obvious, but so many times we do the thing because we think we have to. We do the thing because we think we should. Why are you doing this? What is motivating you to make this promise to yourself? What is motivating you to want to keep it? It's important to actually ask, is there something that's motivating me to want to do this thing? Or is it another one of my long list of things I am supposed to do to be successful? If you have a history of not following through on promises to yourself, then you will need to lower your immediate expectations and make smaller commitments than you've been making in the past that you can be consistent with. You're going to want to do less than you think you can, but you also want to be really intentional about what it is that you're promising yourself to do. And I think it's important to ask yourself if what you're doing is rearranging the chairs on the Titanic or whether you're doing something that is going to lead to lasting change. What I mean by this is this thing, this commitment, yet another promise to yourself that demonstrates that this time you are capable of having unlimited willpower? Like, okay, I'm not going to eat after 8 p.m. Or is this a promise or a commitment that addresses the reason that you want to eat after 8 p.m. or the reason you have run out of willpower so consistently in the past when you have tried not to eat after 8 p.m.? Are you rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, or are you looking at the root cause of what's going on? Because that's how you're going to create permanent, lasting change. Ask yourself, is this a fair or a reasonable thing to promise yourself or commit to? This might sound kind of woo-woo, but you might actually want to look yourself in the eyes in the mirror and say out loud, tell yourself what it is you're committing to. Do you actually believe yourself? Can you look yourself in the eyes and with a straight face say, yeah, this is really what I want to do? Can you actually visualize yourself doing the thing that you are promising yourself to do consistently? Double check this. Check in with yourself, not just your brain, but how does your heart feel about this? When it comes to making promises to ourselves around what we're going to do with our eating, how we're going to eat, why we're going to eat, how we are going to interact with ourselves when we have a craving or an urge, how we're going to talk to ourselves, how we're going to think. It is so easy, and it probably feels so natural to go into this reaction mode of, okay, yeah, I know this dance. This is what I do. This is what I have to do. This is what I need to do. You really want to check in with yourself. And you're probably going to discover, if you do check in with yourself, that promise isn't exactly a good fit for you. You're probably going to discover that you actually do need to make that commitment smaller or easier or shorter or different if you really want to be able to look yourself in the eyes and know that you can keep the promise and that you want to keep the promise. One of the things that is really important to remember here is your goal in this instance is to rebuild your trust. Your goal is to become the person who doesn't flake out on herself. Your goal is not to do superhuman things in a very short span of time and then burn out and then be starting over again. So since we're addressing the question of how to not flake out on yourself, but also how to not set yourself up to be some kind of superhero who does impossible things, I think it's important to also spend some time talking about how you treat yourself and how you react and what you do if you don't keep a promise that you made to yourself. If you don't keep a commitment that you made, how do you currently treat or talk to yourself? Are you allowed to be curious about what happened and just wonder about it? Or do you slam yourself and then default to the whole, I just need to be stronger next time. I ruined it, but next time will be different. Or do you maybe numb out? Maybe you use more food to numb out so that you don't have to be as aware of what happened, at least right now, at least for a little while. Those last two options, beating yourself up or numbing yourself, they're both likely to lead you back to doing the same thing the next time, blaming yourself for the fact that it didn't work this time and pushing yourself harder, but with less confidence than you had, because you're going to lose confidence each time you go through the cycle. Okay, so new way to stop flaking out on yourself. Make smaller, more reasonable, committable commitments that you can commit to. Take time to examine whether they are reactive promises or whether they are real intentional promises that you want to keep. And before you make any commitment or promise to yourself, take that time to ask yourself what you know already about why what you've tried hasn't worked in the past. What do you need that you don't have? It could be time. It could be support. It could be additional tools or resources. It could be a more realistic plan. I hear all these answers all the time. You're only going to get these answers, though, if you take the time to ask the questions. So take a look at why what you have tried in the past hasn't worked. A shortage of time, a shortage of support, tools, strategies, and then make a commitment or a promise that addresses these things. Make it small enough that you can follow through. And remember, don't let your brain diminish what you just accomplished by setting up a plan with small steps, with being intentional, with actually addressing the reason that things haven't worked in the past. And as you take the small steps, don't let your brain diminish those either. Your brain will want to tell you that always you should be doing more. You should have done more. You should have done it faster. That's how brains talk. Don't listen. And then just keep repeating these steps. Listen, I know this information might not feel very satisfying because rebuilding trust is a process. There's no way around it. It's such an important process. You deserve to have your trust back because you do. And because with that trust comes confidence and hope. And this is foundational for creating freedom from overeating. It is the reason that the place we start in my programs is with finding your power again. So much of that power has been eroded by deprivation thinking and traditional weight loss plans and diet culture. And when you figure out how to approach changes that you want to make, changes with your eating or with anything else, actually, when you figure out how to do that from a place of your own power, rooted in your own power and confidence, it is going to be so different from any of the old cycles that you've gone through trying to make changes that haven't worked and rinsing and repeating with that same old dance over and over again. Rebuilding trust is a process. You're going to go through these steps repeatedly, and you're going to do it imperfectly. And your brain is going to talk back to you because your brain is really entrenched with that old way of thinking and the all or nothing ideas and bigger is better, all the things that have gotten you to the place where it's easy to flake out on yourself in the first place. Rebuilding your trust and your confidence, this is a place where having support can be incredibly useful. Be sure to check out your missing piece because this is where I go deeply into this with members. This is, again, rebuilding your self-trust, knowing that you are the person who doesn't flake out on you. This is a bedrock of creating or for creating freedom from overeating. I hope this Q&A episode was helpful to you, Laura, and everyone else, and I will talk to you soon. If you're ready to lose your overeating and emotional eating habits and you are ready to step into a relationship with food that fits you, one that doesn't rely on willpower and deprivation, then now is the time to join your missing piece. Enrollment is open and this is the perfect time to join me. Go to toomuchonherplate.com/freedom or just click on the link in the show notes. Your Missing Piece is the program where I show you step-by-step how to create freedom from overeating with a unique combination of psychologist-designed, personalized work with me, coaching, and smart strategy. You'll learn how to reclaim your power, ditch the diets, and create results that are built to last. Check it all out at toomuchonherplate.com/freedom, and I'll see you inside.